Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We grab a whole stack of sources, dig in, and pull out the key insights so you get the full picture.
That's the plan.
And today, we're diving into something really foundational. Many people know the Buddha taught about equality, that enlightenment was possible for anyone.
Right, that's the common understanding.
But the actual story of how women came to join the monastic order, the Bhikkhunī saṅgha, it's a lot more complicated than just saying, yes, they could join. It's quite a story.
It really is. And that's our mission today, isn't it? To actually uncover the whole story. We're looking at the ancient Bhikkhunīkhandhaka texts to see how the female monastic order was really established.
Exactly.
And this isn't just, dry history. It touches on themes that are still relevant: gender, how institutions develop, how they adapt. You'll really see how rules come about because of real-life situations, community feedback, all of that.
It's like watching an ideal meet reality.
Precisely. How an ideal gets translated into a living, breathing, evolving thing.
Okay, so let's get into that journey. It starts with, incredible persistence from one woman, Mahāpajāpatī Gotamī.
The Buddha's aunt and foster mother.
Right. And she asks for women to be allowed to leave household life, to go forth into homelessness in the Dhamma and Vinaya, as the text says. But the Buddha says no.
Not just once.
3 times. His response was pretty consistent. Enough, Gotamī. Let it not be pleasing to you that women should go forth.
Yeah, quite firm. But her determination, it's just remarkable. She doesn't just accept the no.
What does she do?
She takes this huge step, shaves her head, puts on the saffron robes, the symbols of renunciation, and then walks, with many other Sakyan women, all the way from Cullavagga to Vesali.
On foot.
On foot. Significant journey. And the text paints this picture, of her arriving completely distressed, feet all dusty, crying, standing outside the gate. It really conveys her desperation, but also her absolute commitment.
Wow. So she's there, in this state, and that's when Ananda finds her. He's one of the Buddha's main disciples.
Exactly. Ananda sees her condition, and even though the Buddha had already refused 3 times, he decides to intervene. He goes to the Buddha, repeats her request.
And gets the same answer initially.
Yes, multiple times, the same refusal. But then Ananda changes his approach. He shifts the argument.
How so?
Well, first he asks this fundamental question. Are women actually capable of reaching the fruits of the path? Stream entry, once returning, non-returning, even of hatship, full enlightenment. Is that possible for them in this Dhamma and Vinaya?
And the Buddha's answer?
Unequivocal yes. He affirms they are fully capable.
Okay, so capability isn't the issue.
Right. And then Ananda brings in the personal connection. He reminds the Buddha, look, this is Mahāpajāpatī Gotamī, your foster mother, the one who nursed you after your own mother passed away. He highlights her immense personal contribution to the Buddha's own life.
So it's that combination, their proven spiritual potential and her deep personal significance.
That seems to be the turning point. The Buddha finally agrees, but with a really significant condition.
Which?
Mahāpajāpatī Gotamī must accept 8 Garudhammas, literally weighty rules, and observe them for her entire life. And these rules, interestingly, are presented as the actual method of her ordination, her upasampada.
So acceptance of these rules is her entry into the order.
Effectively, yes. And these 8 rules are absolutely crucial because they don't just allow women in. They immediately set up a kind of hierarchical structure for the Bhikkhunī saṅgha in relation to the Bhikkhu saṅgha.
Okay, let's go through them. What's the first one?
First, a bhikkhunī, even if she's been ordained for 100 years, must greet, rise for, salute, and perform proper duties to a bhikkhu who was ordained on that very same day.
Wow. Okay. So seniority for a bhikkhu always overrides seniority for a bhikkhunī, regardless of time ordained. That's a clear hierarchy.
Very clear. Second, a bhikkhunī must not stay for the rains retreat in a residence where there is no bhikkhu.
Implying some need for male presence or oversight.
It seems that way, yes. A difference in their living arrangements compared to the monks. Third, twice a month, a bhikkhunī must seek 2 things from the bhikkhu saṅgha, asking for the date of the uposatha, the observance day, and coming for exhortation, advice, or teaching.
So built-in dependency for key communal practices. They have to go to the monks for these.
Correct. Fourth, after the rains retreat, the vasana, a bhikkhunī must invite criticism or accusation pavareti from both sanghas, the bhikkhus and the bhikkhunis, regarding anything offensive they might have seen, heard, or suspected her of doing.
Double accountability, then, to both orders.
Yes. And fifth, relatedly, a bhikkhunī who commits a grave offense, a sagodesisa, must undergo a half-month penance called manata towards both sanghas.
Again, involving both communities in serious discipline.
Sixth rule, a female trainee, a sikhamana, who is trained for 2 years in 6 specific precepts, must seek higher ordination upasampada from both saṅghas.
So a two-stage ordination process involving monks and nuns.
Exactly. 7th, a bhikkhuni must not in any way revile or abuse a bhikkhu.
Okay, straightforward respect towards the monks, no verbal attacks.
Right. And the 8th, which is quite striking. From this day forward, the way of speech for bhikkhunis towards bhikkhus is closed off, meaning they can't formally admonish or instruct bhikkhus. But the way of speech for bhikkhus towards bhikkhus is not closed off.
So bhikkhus can formally admonish bhikkhunis, but not the other way around. A clear one-way street for formal correction.
A very clear power dynamic established right there in the founding rules.
And Mahāpajāpatī Gotamī's reaction to these pretty demanding rules.
She accepts them joyfully. The text says she took them like a young woman or man, fond of ornaments, would receive a garland of lotus or jasmine flowers and place it on their head.
That really shows how much she wanted this path for women, despite the conditions.
It absolutely does. But then, immediately after this acceptance, the text has the Buddha saying something quite, well, controversial to Ananda. He predicts that because women have now been allowed to ordain, the holy life, the brahmacharya, this disciplined spiritual path, which would have lasted for 1,000 years, will now only last for 500 years.
That's stark. Why? Does he explain?
He uses 3 analogies. First, like a household with many women and few men is easily plundered by robbers. Second, like a field of rice afflicted with the disease called white mildew, sitahika. And third, like a field of sugarcane afflicted with red rust, manyakika.
So the implication is that the inclusion of women somehow makes the saṅgha more vulnerable or prone to decline.
That's the interpretation often given, yes. It suggests a perceived fragility introduced by the female order. It's a passage that's generated a lot of discussion over the centuries, naturally.
I can imagine.
And the Buddha concludes this section by saying that just as a man would build a strong dike for a large reservoir to stop the water from overflowing, he has laid down these 8 Garudhammas for the bhikkhunis not to be transgressed for life.
So the rules are positioned as a necessary safeguard, a dike to protect the holy life.
That's the metaphor used, yes. Implying they are essential for preserving the integrity and longevity of the practice. Given this perceived vulnerability, it sets the stage for understanding how the community functioned afterwards.
Okay, so the Bhikkhunī saṅgha is established, the Garudhammas are in place. What happens next? How does daily life unfold? Because you mentioned this is where we see the rules really adapting to reality.
Exactly. This is where we move from the founding principles to the nuts and bolts of running a monastic community. And you see, it's not static, it's constantly responding. For instance, ordination itself.
Right. Mahāpajāpatī was ordained by accepting the rules, but what about others?
Initially, the Buddha just said, I allow bhikkhus to give ordination to bhikkhunis. Simple enough. But then some other bhikkhunis started questioning Mahāpajāpati's status, saying, well, she wasn't ordained by bhikkhus, was she?
Ah, a consistency issue.
Right. So the Buddha had to clarify, no, her acceptance of the Garudhammas was her ordination. That established her unique position as the first.
Okay, that makes sense. What other things needed figuring out?
Well, reciting the Patimokkha, the monastic code, the rules they recite together. Initially, bhikkhus did it for the bhikkhunis.
And that caused problems.
Yes, public perception again. People started gossiping, saying things like, look, those must be their wives or their mistresses, seeing them together for these recitations. It wasn't a good look.
So what was the solution?
The Buddha then allowed bhikkhunis to recite the Patimokkha themselves, amongst themselves. But importantly, bhikkhus still had to teach them how to do it correctly.
So increased autonomy, but still under guidance.
Exactly. And you see a similar pattern with confessing offenses, paticamma, and performing formal acts of the saṅgha, kamma. Again, bhikkhunis doing these things with bhikkhus in public places led to complaints.
The same kind of complaints.
Seems like it. So the rules evolved again. Bhikkhunis were allowed to handle these formal acts and confessions among themselves, but again, with bhikkhus providing the initial instruction on the proper procedures.
It's like a gradual handover of responsibility.
Very much so. And it happened with dispute resolution too. If bhikkhunis couldn't sort out a dispute, bhikkhus would initially step in, but some bhikkhunis felt they should handle their own affairs.
They wanted more independence.
Understandably. So the Buddha eventually allowed bhikkhus to formally transfer the authority for conducting these formal acts and confessions entirely to the Bhikkhunī saṅgha, a significant step.
Definitely. What about learning the rules, the Vinaya itself?
There's a story of a bhikkhuni finding it hard to learn the Vinaya because she couldn't just follow the Buddha around constantly like the bhikkhus often could. So the Buddha allowed bhikkhus to specifically teach the Vinaya to the bhikkhunīs.
Again, addressing a practical need. It sounds very responsive.
It really does show a system adapting to the realities on the ground, but not all adaptations were just about practicalities. Some were direct responses to bad behavior.
The six-group monastics.
Yes.
The Chabagyas.
Yes. They show up quite a bit in the Vinaya texts, often pushing boundaries or causing trouble. Here we have incidents involving both monks and nuns from this group.
What do they do?
Well, some Chabagya bhikkhus were, believe it or not, throwing muddy water on bhikkhunīs. And worse, deliberately exposing parts of their bodies, torso, thighs, even genitals, trying to incite lust.
That's shocking. How's that handled?
The Buddha prohibited it outright for bhikkhus and prescribed a specific social punishment. Bhikkhunīs were not to salute those particular bhikkhus.
Okay, but you said nuns from the group were involved too?
Yes, unfortunately. Some Chabadya bhikkhunīs apparently did the same thing back to bhikkhus throwing muddy water, exposing their bodies, torso, breasts, thighs, genitals, to incite lust.
So that behavior was prohibited for them too?
Absolutely. And the punishments prescribed for the bhikkhunīs were aversion and the stopping of advice, ovadeha. It shows misconduct wasn't tolerated from either side.
And this stopping of advice itself needed rules.
Yes, because it's a significant disciplinary measure. It couldn't just be done lightly. Rules were made clarifying that foolish or inexperienced monastics shouldn't impose it, and it couldn't be done without a valid reason or without following up to resolve the underlying issue. Fairness was important.
Makes sense. What about the regular exhortation or ovada that bhikkhunīs had to seek from bhikkhus, based on the Garudhammas?
That also evolved. Initially, all the bhikkhunīs would go together to seek advice.
Leading to
more public complaints. Same issue. Look at them, must be their wives or mistresses, now they'll amuse themselves. You see the pattern.
Right. Reputation management was key.
Constantly. So the Buddha restricted it. First, only 4 or 5 bhikkhunīs should go as a delegation. Then it was further restricted to just 2 or 3 bhikkhunīs going to a designated suitable bhikkhu.
And the process was formalized.
Very much so. The text describes the ritual. The bhikkhunīs approach the chosen bhikkhu, fix their upper robe on one shoulder, bow down at his feet, squat down, cup their hands in respect, and make a formal request for exhortation.
And were all bhikkhus expected to give this?
No, there were exemptions. Bhikkhus who were considered foolish, or were sick, or traveling, or living deep in the forest were exempt, unless a specific appointment was made. It had to be a suitable and available bhikkhu.
It's amazing how these seemingly small details of daily interaction required specific rulings.
It really paints a picture of how carefully this new way of life was being constructed and managed, constantly balancing the spiritual goals with social realities and practical needs. You really are uncovering the whole story, piece by piece.
Absolutely. And it gets even more detailed when we look at things like dress and personal habits. It seems like every aspect of life was scrutinized.
Very much so. It was all part of defining what it meant to be a bhikkhuni, distinct from lay life. Take body binders, for instance. Some bhikkhunīs were wearing these long, fancy ones that made them bend their hips in a certain way.
Like lay fashion.
Exactly. So the Buddha said, no, only single-fold body binders are allowed. And he prohibited certain materials, leather, fancy cloth, woven patterns, coiled designs and styles like long ones, flowered ones, even ones shaped like a snake's head, all because they resembled lay women's adornments.
So the goal was simplicity and avoiding anything that looked like vanity or worldly attachment.
Precisely. And that extended to personal grooming, too. Things like rubbing the hips with stones or bones, slapping body parts, hands, feet, face, even gums maybe to improve circulation or appearance. All forbidden.
And cosmetics.
Completely out. No face rubbing, kneading, powdering, using red arsenic for color, no body makeup, no lip coloring. Anything associated with lay vanity was prohibited.
It sounds incredibly strict.
It was about drawing a very clear line. The list of prohibited lay activities is long. Styling hair, peeking through keyholes, standing in the light suggestively, making others dance, setting up businesses like brothels, taverns, butcher shops, trading, lending money at interest, keeping servants or certain animals, even things like throwing fruit leaves or wearing hair mats.
Wow. A total renunciation of lay life in every detail.
That was the aim. Even robe colors were specified. No solid blue, yellow, red, madder black, or very dark red. No fancy fringes torn, long, flowered, snakehead designs. No jackets, kanyukuka, or upper garments, tidaka, either. Uniformity and simplicity were key.
What about property? If someone died, who got their belongings?
Clear rules there, too, reinforcing the separation between the orders. If a bhikkhunī, a female trainee, sikhamana, or a female novice, samari, died, any property dedicated to them belonged solely to the bhikkhunī saṅgha.
And for the men?
Conversely, property from a deceased bhikkhu, male novice, samanera, male lay follower, or female lay follower belonged to the bhikkhu saṅgha. Clear lines of ownership.
And interactions between monks and nuns sometimes led to specific rules, too.
Yes, there's an incident mentioned where an old bhikkhuni from the Malla clan actually hit a frail bhikkhu. Yes, this led directly to a rule. Bhikkhunis are prohibited from hitting bhikkhus, and they must make way for bhikkhus on the path. It shows how rules often came directly from specific, sometimes quite dramatic incidents.
It really does. And then there are some, well, quite sensitive and unusual situations that came up.
Absolutely. The texts don't shy away from difficult issues. There's a really jarring story about a laywoman who was pregnant, had an abortion, and asked a bhikkhuni to dispose of the fetus in her alms bowl.
Oh my goodness.
And then a bhikkhu, who was bound by a vow to share whatever alms he received, was offered food from that same bowl by the bhikkhuni, and he discovered the fetus.
That's horrifying.
It led to a specific rule. Bhikkhunis are prohibited from using their alms bowls to dispose of human fetuses, a very specific rule born from a shocking event.
Understandably.
What else? There's a rule against the 6 group bhikkhunis turning their alms bowls upside down when interacting with the bhikkhus, perhaps as a sign of refusal or defiance. They were instructed to turn the bowl upright and explicitly invite the bhikkhu to share if appropriate.
Another behavioral correction.
And another quite strange one. A prohibition against bhikkhunis meticulously examining discarded male genitalia found in the street.
Why would they? Never mind. It just shows that anything that happened might lead to a rule if it caused concern.
Exactly. Even food sharing between individual monks and nuns became regulated. Lay people complained if a bhikkhu gave food intended for himself directly to a bhikkhuni or vice versa, it raised suspicions.
So how was that resolved?
It was deemed acceptable if the food was given formally to the entire saṅgha, either the bhikkhu saṅgha or bhikkhunī saṅgha, or if it was given to individuals only when there was an abundance of food available. Again, managing perceptions and promoting communal sharing.
Practical needs kept coming up too, right? Like lodging?
Yes. Bhikkhus generally had more established monasteries and thus more lodging, sanasana. Bhikkhunis, especially early on, often lacked sufficient space. So the Buddha allowed bhikkhus to provide temporary lodging for bhikkhunis. Pragmatism.
And menstruation. That must have posed practical challenges in a communal monastic setting.
It did. The texts mention bhikkhunis staining furniture during their periods. This led to allowances for specific cloths, an avasate kivara, possibly a mat or ground cloth, and an akakalaka, described as a type of loincloth. Also, a cord tied to the thigh, a saveya kutisatakan, was permitted.
A practical solution.
And interestingly, the waistband, the regular kutisatakan, was permitted only during menstruation, not all the time. Again, the reason given was to avoid resembling laywomen who might wear such things constantly. The monastic identity was paramount.
What about the requirements for becoming a bhikkhuni in the first place? Were they extensive?
Very. The text lists 24 anatarika dhamma obstructive conditions or things that would prevent ordination. These had to be checked thoroughly.
What kind of things?
It covered a wide range. Serious diseases like leprosy, boils, eczema, tuberculosis, epilepsy, being intersex or having certain physical characteristics, social status like being a slave or in debt, not having permission from parents or husband, being under 20 years old, not having the full set of robes and bowls, even being in the king's service. It was a rigorous screening process.
To ensure candidates were suitable and free from entanglements.
Precisely. And the ordination process itself got refined. Initially, asking these very personal questions in the full assembly intimidated some candidates.
I can imagine.
So the Buddha adjusted the procedure. He allowed for a preliminary instruction and questioning to happen aside, away from the main assembly, conducted by a competent, appointed bhikkhuni. This included formally naming the preceptor and showing the robes and bowl. Only then would the candidate face the formal questioning in the assembly.
Making it a bit less daunting.
Yes. And remember, it was a dual ordination first. They were questioned and accepted by the bhikkhunī saṅgha, and then they went before the bhikkhu saṅgha, where the 24 obstructive conditions were asked all over again.
A thorough two-part process.
Very. And the level of detail continues. Rules for seating at communal meals. The first 8 bhikkhunis to arrive sat according to their seniority, time since ordination, but anyone arriving after that sat in order of arrival. However, in other settings, like teachings, seating was strictly by seniority.
Specificity down to seating arrangements.
Absolutely. And the Pavarana ceremony, the invitation at the end of the rains retreat for monastics to point out each other's faults, that evolved too.
How so?
Initially, there was no Pavarana for bhikkhunīs. Then they did it amongst themselves, Atta Pavarana. Then they tried doing it jointly with the bhikkhus, but that apparently caused a commotion.
More public perception issues.
Seems likely. So the final ruling was that the bhikkhuni should conduct their pavarana amongst themselves first, and then either after the meal on the same day or the next day, send a representative, one competent, appointed bhikkhuni to perform the pavarana invitation on behalf of the entire bhikkhuni saṅgha to the bhikkhu saṅgha.
Streamlining the process while maintaining the connection.
Exactly. Travel was another area. Using palanquins or carriages was forbidden for bhikkhunīs.
Why?
The text says it made them look like prostitutes to the public. Again, that concern for reputation. But crucially, exceptions were made for sickness. A sick bhikkhuni could use a vehicle driven by a man or a woman, or be carried on a stretcher or litter, compassion tempering the strictness.
And there was that unique case of ordination by messenger.
Yes, Adhikasi. She was a former prostitute who wanted to ordain but couldn't travel because thugs were blocking the road, specifically targeting her.
So she was stuck.
Right. But the Buddha, recognizing her sincerity, allowed a competent bhikkhuni to act as her messenger, performing the necessary questions and confirmations remotely, in a sense. It's an amazing example of adapting the rules to extreme circumstances.
Incredible flexibility. What about living in the forest?
That was prohibited for bhikkhunīs. The reason given was the danger of being molested by thugs. Safety was a clear priority.
Understandable. And donations.
More rules evolved there, too. If laypeople gave property specifically for the bhikkhuni saṅgha, it could be used for communal shelters, udosito upasayo for new construction projects, navakama, and even, if necessary, designated for individual use by a bhikkhuni, practical management of resources.
Then there's the really sensitive issue of pregnancy that you touched on earlier.
Oh yes, the case of the bhikkhuni who was already pregnant before she ordained, but it wasn't discovered until later.
What happened to her and the child?
The Buddha ruled that she shouldn't be disrobed, as the pregnancy predated her ordination. She was allowed to keep the child and raise him within the monastery until he reached an age of understanding.
And she had help.
Yes, the Buddha allowed another bhikkhuni to be appointed as a companion, anupalika, specifically to help care for the mother and child, but with a very specific instruction. The companion bhikkhuni was to treat the growing child as if it were any other man, meaning maintain appropriate monastic distance and boundaries even while providing necessary care.
A very compassionate yet carefully bounded solution.
It really is. And a similar allowance for a companion bhikkhuni was made for a bhikkhuni undergoing the manada penance for a grave offense, ensuring she wasn't isolated during that difficult time.
What about those who left? Could they come back?
No. The rules are clear. If a bhikkhuni formally renounced the training or joined another religious sect, she could not be reordained into the bhikkhuni saṅgha. It was a lifelong commitment.
Okay. Were there issues with interacting with laymen for basic needs?
There were. Some bhikkhunis felt embarrassed receiving respectful greetings from men or having men cut their hair or nails or treat wounds, but the Buddha allowed these things, recognizing them as practical necessities.
Even sitting posture had rules.
Yes. Sitting fully cross-legged, palukana, was prohibited if the motivation was enjoying the feeling of physical pressure or contact, but sitting half cross-legged, apalokan, was allowed, especially for those who were sick.
And latrines.
Specific rules there, too. No defecating openly in the latrine area, and definitely no dropping fetuses there. Covered toilet structures with a hole below were permitted. Basic sanitation and decorum.
Finally, bathing.
Also regulated. No bathing using perfumed powders or scented clay, only plain clay was allowed. No bathing in designated bathing houses or against the current of a river, or at fords known to be unsafe or used by men. They were only to use fords designated for women.
It's just an incredible level of detail covering every conceivable aspect of life.
It really underscores that these rules weren't just abstract principles. They were living, breathing responses to the actual messy reality of building a community, especially one that challenged existing social norms. It was dynamic.
And throughout this whole process, as we've seen, there's this consistent reinforcement of a certain hierarchy, isn't there?
Yes, that initial structure laid out in the Garudhammas echoes through. The text explicitly reiterates near the end that bhikkhunīs cannot initiate formal processes like upasatha or pavarana for bhikkhus, nor admonish, rebuke, question, or reprimand them formally.
but the reverse is allowed.
But bhikkhus are explicitly allowed to do all of those things towards bhikkhunīs. It cements that power dynamic, that specific structure of authority within the Vinaya.
So looking back at this whole deep dive, it feels like we really have managed to uncover the whole story, or at least a much fuller version of it.
I think so. We've moved way beyond just women were allowed to ordain. We've seen the struggle, the negotiations, the detailed rules, the constant adaptation. It's a complex, intricate picture.
And hopefully you, our listeners, now have a much more nuanced understanding of how a major religious institution actually came into being and evolved day by day. You see it grappling with ideals, social pressures, practical problems, and the sheer dedication of its members.
It's a fascinating case study in institution building.
Definitely. So maybe a final thought to leave everyone with.
Well, perhaps think about this. How do these ancient texts, which can seem so rigid with all their detailed rules, actually reveal a surprisingly dynamic and responsive system?
What does that tell us about the nature of rules and leadership and adaptation? Not just back then, but maybe even in our own organizations and communities today as we try to balance principles with the practicalities of life.
Something to mull over.
Indeed. Lots to think about. Join us next time for another deep dive